Hello, everyone. I'm Paul,
And I'm Bucky.
and we are here from Paul and Bucky's Skills for Life. And today we are talking about a sobering topic. We are talking about how you can help your peers and your friends who are feeling suicidal. And it's a really difficult topic, and we want to let people know that this can be really tough for some people to talk about. So, a lot of people have had some experience with suicide and suicidal feelings, and it's really important that as you watch this, make sure you have some support if you need it, or call a friend, or let them know if this kind of reminds you of some things that might have happened in your life or in friends' lives. But hopefully, this information will help you to be able to respond well to a friend or a peer and maybe even save someone's life. So, this is really important information, and we really appreciate you taking the time to look at this and to work on your skills to be able to respond well when someone might say something to you or you might suspect that they are feeling suicidal. Let's start and talk just a little bit about um, what some of the risk factors might be. And I want to be clear that there's a lot of stigma around people feeling having suicidal feelings, like somehow people are weak and somehow people there's something wrong with them. And I want to kind of put this into perspective. um, if I had a really bad, especially during this time of COVID, if I started having symptoms where I wasn't feeling well and I got a really bad sore throat, we often don't have any stigma about going to the doctor and getting those things looked at. And I'd like you to think about suicidality in a different way today. I'd like you to think about suicidality more as, like, having something in our brain that's not quite working the way it should. And that shouldn't be a sign of shame or that something's going on. It should be a symptom that, hey, we suicidality is treatable, and it is something that, when it comes up, it's serious, and we should all go and get that checked out. Just like if my appendicitis started really hurting, my appendix started hurting, and I was like, oh, I would immediately go to the doctor. And suicidality is a thing where if you're starting to feel those feelings, then it's important to reach out. One example, which we'll talk about a little bit later, um, is that if you take certain antidepressants, they can actually, while they're starting to work in the first few weeks, they can actually cause suicidality. So to me, that says that there is a biological component to suicidality. So much like when, your appendix burst, our brain can also produce suicidality, and it can be triggered by biological means. So there's no shame when these feelings happen, and it's really important to share them with friends or safe people, and to get some support around that. And not to think of it as, a personal flaw, that because any person can have these feelings, whether you're young or old, um, and there's lots of help and support out there. So some things that, some factors that might go into putting you at higher risk. Not that everyone who has depression is suicidal, and not every suicidal person is depressed, but there is a connection. The more depressive episodes you have, the more likely you are at higher risk for suicide. So, thinking of that, using drugs and alcohol, sometimes there's a large number of people who successfully um, attempt or commit suicide. There is a large time when they're actually using drugs or alcohol, because alcohol impairs our judgment and takes away some of our ability to cope with things, and sometimes it can make our ability to fight that less powerful. So drugs and alcohol are definitely a factor. And things like bullying, we've seen horrible instances where people bullied at school, youth, teens, um, and being very isolated can put you at a higher risk. Um, Trauma, certainly if you have a trauma history, then that can sometimes put you at a higher risk category later on when things when things get really tough. Um, and so there's a lot of different things that can be in play for someone to experience some suicidality. Um, and really, it's a feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, and it's really important that we address that. And Bucky, I think you're going to talk a little bit about what some of the warning signs are that we might look for.
Sure, Paul, thanks. I think if you think of warning signs, I sort of put them as warning signs that are cause for immediate concern versus those that are warning signs that are maybe are not as an immediate concern, but they're definitely a concern there. So immediate concern obviously is any threatening of suicide or expressing suicidal ideas, strong wish to die. Obviously making, if a person has an actual plan, that means that they've really thought about it and they're really thinking seriously about ending their life. So especially if you know that this person has access to means of killing themselves, maybe they have access to weapons or certain drugs or whatever. So that definitely sort of that concern amplifies the concern. Taking that could be writing, drawing, or things of those natures that symbolize wanting to die. That can be also, and suicide can be very concerning. If a person's giving away his prized possessions, showing, an abrupt, sometimes too, they could be someone who is sad in general, but all of a sudden they show an abrupt improvement. And sometimes that can, like they're trying to put their life in order, that can be concerning as well. So it's really, those are some more immediate concerns that maybe action, your required action is immediate. Other things that, there are a lot of other things that obviously bring us concern, increased use of drugs and alcohol. Maybe the other thing too is a behavioral change from the normal. Like if you know this person and all of a sudden they're acting quite differently, that can be a warning sign. Persistent feelings of failure, maybe consistent complaining, really worried about their physical appearance all of a sudden. Preoccupation with death, all these things can be other warning signs. And again, I want to go back to what Paul says about depression. Depression doesn't mean that if you are depressed doesn't mean you are suicidal. But if you're suicidal and you're depressed at the same time and you experience depression, that can definitely amplify the situation. So it's just something to be looking out for. Also, just what a person says. I mean, maybe they say, "Oh, I wish I wasn't around," or "If I wasn't around, this wouldn't have happened," or, "I just want to die," or whatever. Those are statements that are really concerning. So, all these are warning signs, and usually, I know in myself, I sort of get a feeling in my gut that's like, "Wow, this sounds like it's really serious." And even if you don't know, it's always good to check it out. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about how to handle a situation where you get that concern over a person's well-being and what you can do and what you can say. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that now.
Yes. And I want to also go back and mention just a couple of other risk factors that are out there. One to think about is if someone close to us has ever committed suicide, that could put us at a higher risk, or sometimes even like a really major life event, a negative life event that has happened can sometimes put people in a suicidal state. And so it's really important to pay attention to folks if something really negative has happened in their life and it seems like they may not be doing so well. Checking in with them, like Bucky said, is a very good idea. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit about how you might respond to someone who comes up to you and shares that they are feeling suicidal and how you might not want to respond. there's a lot of myths out there about people who are suicidal, and I want to take a moment just to address a few of those and some things that we might not want to do. One of the big ones that I hear is that people um, are seeking attention, and there are some people who struggle with suicidality more regularly, and it can kind of come up. And um, every every time someone expresses suicide or is feeling suicidal, we need to take them seriously. And if they're really feeling that pain, then they need that attention. So um, most people aren't really trying to manipulate you by saying that, but that's they actually are feeling that level of helplessness, hopelessness, and frustration. And so every time it's really important to take that seriously. The other things that sometimes people do is we don't always feel comfortable. We don't know what to say. It can be really scary when someone says, I'm feeling suicidal. And a lot of times I hear people saying things like, oh, don't say that. You don't really think that. And so really sort of not validating what the person has shared with you. And most people who are suicidal actually try to tell someone they're feeling that way, or they say it to someone. And unfortunately, and part of why we want to do this video is so that everyone has skills in which they can use in order to respond effectively to someone who is feeling suicidal. And so you'll know when you're feeling uncomfortable, not knowing what to say, saying things like, don't say that, not the best thing. And the other thing is challenging someone to do it. Sometimes people will do that, try to call someone's bluff, so to speak, and that also is very dangerous and not a good idea. And really, some of the skills that we've already talked about in our segments, like using active listening skills and being supportive, those are the things that are the best to do. So really showing care and recognizing that and acknowledging how much pain this person is in, and that whatever they're going through right now, when you're depressed or suicidal, your brain actually has a difficulty doing forward thinking. So looking into the future and seeing that, a lot of us sometimes can think, well, things will get better and we know this will pass. And when you're feeling really depressed or suicidal, your brain actually isn't functioning well in that way. And so your ability to see the future or to look in is not functioning nearly as well as it normally does. So it's really important that we try to be that, help them to be more hopeful. And one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to give them advice. We want to listen and kind of sit with them in their pain. And that can be really hard. Sometimes we really want to make someone feel better. And the best thing we can do is sit with them and listen to them and care for them and say, you know what? I really hear how much this hurts, and I just want you to know I'm here for you, and I really care about you. And that's the most important thing that you can do. And you might be thinking, boy, what if I say something that screws this up? And really, I always try to tell people, if what you're doing is listening and reflecting and getting help, you really can't do anything that's harmful. If you're just sort of using your active listening skills and letting people know how much you care, then you're probably going to do a lot. And you don't have to be an expert to try to help someone with this. So some other things to do, and remember, you're not a counselor, you're a friend, and you're trying to get the help and be supportive. The role of a counselor or a mental health professional is very important. And depending on your situation, you might be a youth, someone who doesn't necessarily know how to navigate some of those, more community systems. So getting a trusted adult will be really important. And if you're an adult, anyone can feel suicidal. So if it's a friend or coworker, then it's important to also know your resources and know where you can reach out. For youth, a lot of great places to go are teachers, trusted teachers, guidance counselors, neighbors, anyone that you know will really be able to listen. And I think if you have a coworker, sometimes looking at your EFAP or employee support system that's there, or calling, and Bucky's going to talk more about resources, but calling a local crisis line to get some help. And some other things that you can do is, and again, you're not a counselor, but just to kind of gauge, sometimes we're sort of like, how serious is this? And it is always okay to ask someone. You're not going to plant another myth is that by asking someone if they're suicidal, you're going to plant that idea in their head, and you will not. And if they say, you know, I'm not suicidal at all, then that's okay. You can just say, well, thanks. I just wanted to check, and something in my gut, I must be wrong. But by asking them, you're not going to plant the idea, and you might actually give them um, some relief by them being able to talk about what they've been kind of holding in. So just by saying, I know you've been really depressed lately, and I know things are really hard. I'm just wondering, have you been thinking about killing yourself? And it's okay to say that. Or are you thinking about suicide? And most people will be happy that you asked, even if they're not. They might be like, wow, you really care that you asked me that. I'm not feeling that way. Or they might say yes. And I want to really talk about what happens if they say yes. So sometimes it's important to kind of gauge what level of danger they might be in. So I like to use what I call a Likert scale, which is 1 to 10. So I might say, so on a scale of 10, 10 being, I'm going to hurt myself or kill myself, and 1 being, no, there's no chance of that. I would say, where do you place yourself? And if someone puts themselves at like a 5 or higher, I get a little bit nervous. And another thing that Bucky mentioned that's really important is, do they have a plan? And it's okay to ask. So if I ask someone and they say, I'm probably a 7, I'm kind of nervous. And if they say, yes, I have a plan, and then do they have the means? So if they have a way that they've thought about and that way is accessible to them, then I would be pretty worried. If someone says, I wouldn't do it, but the thoughts keep coming up, then I have some time. I still need to get some help for this person, but it may not be as serious as someone that says, yeah, I have a plan, I've been thinking about it, and I have access to do that. So use your best judgment. If you're in that situation, then it might be time to call a crisis line with that person and say, I really care about you. And right now, I want to get you the best help, and I need help if sometimes they don't want you to do this. So I try to say, I need help to help you the best. So let's call this crisis line together. And I'm going to call the crisis line just to ask how I can be the most helpful to you. And then another thing to avoid is saying that you'll keep it a secret. And a lot of people want to just talk to you, and they will tell you that they don't want you to share that. And it's really important that you do. And you only share it with people that can get help. So you don't go tell everyone. But calling a local crisis hotline together, that is a great idea because that's confidential, and that gives them a chance to talk about it with someone who really knows how to help them, and you can play a supportive role while they do that. And then helping them get to a counselor, maybe asking them if they've made an appointment. And we'll talk about other resources that are out there, call lines that you can help if you're waiting for an appointment. And then finding out who else you can talk to. So a parent, a family member, someone that can stay on top of what's happening and really help support to keep that person safe. So don't keep it to yourself, and try to get more people involved to be helpful, because you also don't want to take this burden on by yourself, because that can be a lot, and we don't all have the tools as counselors to be able to say, to assess what's happening and to say the exact right thing. But if you're listening and being supportive and getting help, you're doing quite a bit. And then Bucky, do you want to talk about some prevention and protective factors, or if there's anything I've missed that you want to add?
No, I think, after you talk to somebody who is suicidal or having suicidal thoughts, that can be a pretty emotional conversation. And it can take a toll on you. It could be triggering things for you that may have happened in the past, or maybe just going through that tough conversation can really be hard. So I just want to say that if you've gone through that conversation with someone, it's really important to take care of yourself after that, and and practice self-care, whatever you need to do. Maybe you need to talk to somebody just to sort of help you through it. But it's really important. Just as if you went and saved somebody with CPR, on the street, you would probably after that be saying to yourself, wow, that was pretty traumatic. And so, so taking care of yourself is really important, so that you can be the best you can be. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other things that are happening, because as you may know, suicide is also in the news. Especially, I don't know if you've been listening because of the current pandemic, but lots of people have been isolated for long periods of time. So sometimes these feelings when you're isolated like this can come up. So it's definitely something that government's been thinking about. Public health officials have definitely been thinking about. And so there's a lot happening. And so I just wanted to make you aware of some of those things, because really, it's not just our individual responses to suicide, it is our collective response to this issue that is really going to help. So I'm going to mention a few things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is something called developmental assets. And this is definitely youth-based, but basically this developmental asset research is from a place called the Search Institute. And if you look them up online, there's lots of information about it, but basically there are 40 different developmental assets. And so half of those are external assets, and those are things that can be controlled by schools and community members, things that can promote youth empowerment, belonging, giving youth structure, and letting them know that they're cared for. So those are some of those external assets, and the internal assets are more things that we can promote within within individuals. So things like life skills, active listening skills. Those things like that are more of the internal assets. But so there's a lot of research and information about this. Some schools are actually incorporating developmental assets into their curriculum. But it's just something to be aware of. And what can I do as a community member or in my workplace to promote developmental assets. So those are some things to think about. There's also things on a national level. I'm going to talk a little bit what it looks like here in Vermont, but there's something called Zero Suicide, and basically it's a framework, a community framework on suicide prevention. And one of the things they're doing is coming up with like screenings and resources that can be given at health clinics. So when you go in for, like we talked at the beginning, when you go in for that appendicitis or whatever, they're not only looking at your physical health, but they're checking your mental health also. So these are the types of things, another prevention activity that is going on. Another one, an interesting one I found really interesting is called Gun Shop. And basically what it is it's getting gun shop owners to, when a customer comes in and purchases a gun, also giving them some information about suicide prevention. So just helping, because guns are often used in suicide. So it's just another avenue in which I think you can look at the community as a whole trying to help out. So I just want to stress that it's just, anything you can do both individually, but also as a collective group is going to be helpful in preventing suicide, because it is a national problem, state problem, local problem. Like Paul said in the beginning, we've all probably experienced in our lives some connection with suicide. So I think anything that we can do to help out would be beneficial. The other thing I'll just throw this out there. There is grant money that's available to help with this. I know that the state of Vermont just got a grant in September to help out with suicide prevention. There's also we're going to give you some websites and stuff to take a look at, but there is a program called You Matter, and You Matter has curriculum that can be taught in schools from little kids on up on suicide prevention. So it's been very successful so far. So something else to think about. So
yes, and I also want to acknowledge when we talk about risk factors, there is one group, the LGBTQ population, that they're in Vermont really struggle with suicide, and a lot of that is because of not having enough support from our society and our culture. And so definitely reaching out and whatever we can do to help make our LGBTQ brothers and sisters feel supported and safe, and then making sure that we're checking in when things are tough.
So I think there are several different resources that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to print some of these out, but there's definitely the National Suicide Hotline that I want to make you aware of. It's a 1-800 number, 273-8255. You can always call that number. If you're looking for resources, the 211 number, instead of not 911, but 211, is usually a great number to call to find out different resources in your local area, especially your local community mental health agency and their crisis line. There is also some information about texting that you can send, texts that you can send to get help. So there's a lot of different ways that you can access a variety of different resources. And we're also going to be putting up some links that will take you to some spots on the internet that will give you some really good information. There is a ton of information out there, and there's a lot of good work happening. And so, take a look at what's out there. And if you know of anything that you feel like you want to share, please feel free to, share it with us in our comments.
Yes, and just to remember, if you're watching this video and you are someone who's feeling suicidal, just remember not to feel shame, but to reach out to someone and know that there are people that care about you. And each of us is a very unique and the only person like us that has ever been here. And that is such a valuable thing to have in the world. And so you're worth it. And I love the title of You Matter, and that every person on this planet matters, and to make sure that you're getting the support you need. And don't be afraid if you let someone know and they don't know how to handle it so well, find another person. And there's no shame. And remember that it's hard sometimes to remember that things can get better, and there are things we can do, and there are supports out there for us. And so make sure you reach out until you have someone that really hears you and is able to get you help. So thank you very much. This has been a tough topic, but it's really important. And the more of us that know how we can reach out and help people, the better. And so please leave us any questions or comments below, and feel free to like and subscribe. And then we will put a number of links down below so that you can check out some of these sites. And it's not a matter of if, but when you will be confronted by someone who is suicidal. So the more you get yourself ready and the more information you're armed with, the better off you'll be able to handle that situation and maybe save a life. Just like we all try to learn CPR and first aid, learning how to help someone who's feeling suicidal is just as important. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on our next video.
All right. Thank you, everybody.